Laughter. Of course, I hired someone. You think I trust real doctors with this? A pause. Yes, Elaine. I know it's risky, but desperate times. I've already prepped the papers. Once she signs those transfers, I'll figure out the rest. Evelyn froze, her hand clenched around the folder she held, her chest once filled with tentative compassion, now hardened into stone. She stepped back from the doorway, her breath shallow as the conversation continued. More laughter, more planning. Every instinct in her screamed, rage, hurt. The betrayal wasn't new, but this performance, this calculated puppetry of illness carved deeper than before. Back in her room, Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed. The journal lay open beside her, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she stared at the wall, allowing each wave of emotion to crest and crash. Pity gone. Guilt fading. Resolve rising. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about years of miscommunication or generational trauma. This was cruelty weaponized, strategized, and Evelyn was done. That evening, she made her own appointment with Dr. Kuma, her real physician, to get documentation that Margot had never attended any local hospital. She also scheduled a meeting with Thomas Reyes for the next morning, citing escalation of abuse. She no longer saw Margot as fragile. She saw her as dangerous. When she passed Margot in the hallway later that night, the older woman leaned on her cane and sighed. It's getting worse, Margot whispered. Everything feels harder. Evelyn looked her in the eye, flat and unwavering. I'm sure it does, she said coldly. Playing sick takes energy. Margot's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. The line had been crossed, and Evelyn was on the other side now, with no intention of going back. The envelope was plain, no return address, just Evelyn's name in delicate, slanted handwriting. It arrived tucked between grocery coupons and a water bill, almost invisible if she hadn't sifted through the pile that morning. She turned it over slowly, uncertain. Inside was a single page, thick cream stationery. Handwritten. Dear Evelyn, it began, I hope you don't mind this letter. I didn't want to intrude in person, but I've seen you from my window, not to spy, only to bear witness. You moved through that house like someone walking on glass. Evelyn paused, already breathless. I've watched how you bend yourself to fit invisible rules. How often you carry silence. I don't know your story, but I recognize its shape. Please know you are not invisible and you are not wrong. With quiet admiration, Elaine Darnell. Elaine, the woman 2 houses down, widowed, always in her garden. They'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, a wave here, a smile there, but nothing more. Evelyn read the letter 3 times. By the second, her hands trembled. By the third, her eyes burned. Not from pain, but from recognition. Someone had seen her, not as a role, not as a caretaker, but as a person. She folded the letter with reverence and tucked it into the back pocket of her journal. It wasn't a lifeline, but it was a light, a small, steady one. Later that afternoon, Evelyn began the work of reclaiming her space. Not dramatically, no hammers or paint cans, just deliberate choices. She removed the glass bowl of fake lemons from the coffee table and replaced it with a sketchbook and a vase of real eucalyptus. The scent filled the room, sharp, alive. She gathered the porcelain figurines Margot had installed in the bookshelf and boxed them away. In their place, she slid in books she hadn't touched in years, fiction, essays, poetry, anything that reminded her of who she'd once been. In the guest room, she stripped the bed Margot insisted on keeping for appearance, then repurposed the space as a reading nook, 1 chair, 1 lamp, and a framed print of the Italian coastline. It was quiet work, intimate, like stitching together parts of herself that had come undone. When evening came, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. A checklist waited. Cancel joint utility accounts. Finalize new P.O. box. Send updated legal forms to Thomas. Each item checked off felt like a stone lifted. The hardest part came last. Ellen opened a manila folder labeled medical. Power of attorney. For years, Margot's name had been the sole contact, the designated decision-maker. Evelyn stared at the form, heart pounding, then slowly scratched a line through Margot's name. In its place, she wrote, "No proxy." Listed. She wasn't ready to trust anyone else yet, but she knew who she no longer trusted. As she saved the changes and filed the documents, Evelyn noticed the weight in her chest had shifted. Still heavy, but now anchored by intent, not fear. That night she lit a single candle in the living room and let it burn down to the wick. No television, no music. Just the soft flicker against the walls she was finally beginning to see as her own. She sat there until midnight. Journal open on her lap, pen poised over a blank page. Then she wrote some walls of paper thin enough to tear, but some, when rebuilt, can hold a life worth living. The attic smelled like cedar and dust, the scent of disuse and memory. Ellen climbed slowly, flashlight in hand, looking for the old utility box Thomas had asked about. As she sifted through holiday decor and brittle cardboard, her fingers brushed a smaller container, mahogany, with a rusted latch, and initials carved faintly on the lid, JLM, her father's box. She hadn't seen it in years, maybe not since the funeral. Margot had claimed it was just old receipts and shoved it into storage. But Evelyn remembered how he used to lock it with care, slip notes into its folds, always telling her not everything needs to be loud to matter. She opened the latch. Inside were letters. Dozens of them yellowed and creased, tied together with twine. Most were addressed to her father's old friend, a man Evelyn vaguely recalled from cookouts and summer afternoons. But one envelope was different. It had her name on it, her breath caught. The paper was thin, delicate, handwritten in familiar curves. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I suppose time has finally pushed things to the surface. I don't know if I deserve to be heard, but I need to tell you something I never said. While I was alive, I saw it. All of it. The way Margot cut you with her silence, praised others louder than she ever praised you, reshaped the house to her image until you couldn't find your own reflection. I watched you shrink to keep peace. Watched you twist your hopes into something manageable. And I said nothing because I was afraid. I told myself it wasn't my place. That she'd get better. That if I interfered, I'd only make things worse. The truth is I wasn't strong enough to challenge her. I chose quiet and you paid for it. I am so sorry. Love, Dad." Evelyn sat back on her heels, the letter trembling in her hand. The air thickened around her, pressing at her throat. She had clung to his memory as a kind of sanctuary. Gentle smiles, quiet support, the one person who hadn't demanded more than she could give. Now that image cracked, revealing something harder beneath. He had known, and still he had done nothing. Tears came without drama, just a steady slide down her cheeks, salt soaking into the paper she couldn't let go of. This wasn't betrayal like Margot's. This was the erosion of her last foothold. Her father had been her quiet hope, and he had chosen silence, too. For a long time, Evelyn didn't move. The letter rested in her lap like a weight she didn't know how to carry. But then something shifted. Not clarity, not forgiveness, just space, room for a new question. What if love had never been enough? What if survival had always meant letting go of the dream that someone would save her? She folded the letter gently, placed it back in the box, and stood downstairs. The house felt different. Not haunted, just honest. No illusions now. No lingering. Maybe they meant wells. Just Evelyn, a woman who'd been bent by absence and expectation, now beginning to rise. She poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window, watching dusk settle across the lawn. The loss still stung, but in the ache something else had emerged, a quiet understanding. She wasn't broken because she'd been unloved. She was powerful because she'd kept going anyway. Later that night, she wrote a new page in her journal. The truth hurt more than I expected. But in losing the last pedestal, I gained both feet. She signed It this time, just her name, Evelyn. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have. Inside were documents Evelyn had signed 3 days earlier in Thomas Ryer's office. Deed transfers, notarized statements, power of attorney revocations. Each page had required a breath, a moment of stillness before the pen touched paper, but she had done it. No hesitation, no glancing over her shoulder. Now the final notice was ready for delivery. That morning she left it on the kitchen table, plain and undeniable. Margot walked in hours later, her heels sharp against the tile. Evelyn didn't look up. She was slicing pears, calm, methodical. Margot paused when she saw the envelope. Her fingers hovered above it before picking it up. She didn't open it immediately. She read the name in the top corner, the embossed logo of the law office, and went still. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice had already cooled. "Read it," Evelyn said without turning around. A long silence followed. When Margot finally spoke, her words came like ice. "So that's it?" Evelyn placed the knife down carefully. "That's it? You think this house is yours because of a few signatures?" "It is mine," Evelyn replied, turning to face her. "Not because of the paper. Because I stayed when no one else would. I gave up everything in these walls, and now I'm done." Margot's face didn't flinch, but something behind her eyes shifted. Confusion masquerading as control. "I suppose you think you're strong now," she sneered. "No," Evelyn said, "I know I am." Margot didn't argue further. She left the kitchen, the envelope still in hand. The door to her room slammed, not dramatically, but with the finality of someone accepting an inevitable defeat. The next 2 days passed with minimal conversation. Margot didn't mention the documents again. She didn't attempt another performance, another plea for sympathy. She simply moved through the house like a ghost, gathering things into suitcases with curt efficiency. Evelyn let her. She didn't ask where Margot was going. She didn't offer help. She didn't offer farewell. On the third morning, before the sun had fully risen, Evelyn heard the soft scrape of luggage wheels across the hardwood floor. She stayed in bed, eyes open, listening to the quiet chaos of departure. The front door opened, closed. A car idled for a few minutes outside, then faded down the street. Silence returned. Real silence. Not the kind filled with fear or tension, but the kind that expanded like breath after a deep dive. Evelyn got up and padded downstairs barefoot. The living room was still. A few picture frames were missing from the mantel. Some drawers left open. The faintest trace of Margot's perfume lingered in the air like old perfume. But the house had stayed. She walked room to room slowly, not searching, just witnessing, touching the doorknobs, running her fingers along the window sills. She opened every window one by one, letting the morning air move freely, the scent of eucalyptus, the chirp of birds, the rising sun warming. Evelyn had spent the entire morning arranging the table just so. The floral linen, white with faded blue violets, was freshly pressed, though the frayed corners curled no matter how much she tried to smooth them. She set out the china plates Margot liked to use for real occasions, polished the silverware until her fingers ached, and lined the wine glasses exactly to and from each plate. In the kitchen, poached salmon rested under a foiled tent. Roasted carrots, with thyme waited in the oven, and the peach tart, golden and fragrant, cooled near the window. She double-checked every detail. Candles trimmed, playlists soft and nostalgic, seating arranged to Margot's preference. This birthday, her mother's 64th, had to be right. Not because Evelyn believed it would change anything, but because she needed the possibility, a fragile hope that maybe this year something might shift even slightly. If not love, then at least civility. Quiet, a moment of peace. Guests arrived on time. June, Margot's bridge partner, with her cloud of perfume and lacquered nails. Lori, their distant cousin who only appeared when free wine was involved, and 2 neighbors from down the block who'd known Evelyn since her awkward teenage years. Small talk filled the space as wine poured and laughter chimed politely. Evelyn floated between the kitchen and dining room, her hands always occupied, plates, napkins, a bottle opener. When everyone was seated, Margot took her place at the head of the table. She wore a silk scarf knotted at her throat, a relic from her younger days when she fancied herself a woman of refinement. Her lipstick was too red, her smile too sharp. Evelyn poured the final glass of Chardonnay and eased into her seat. Margot raised her glass to another year of aging without baggage. She began, her voice carrying easily over the soft music. A few guests chuckled politely. Evelyn smiled, unsure. And Margot added, swirling her warmth in it. You'll tell yourself this was necessary, that I was toxic. But someday you'll sit in this empty house and realize what you've done. You didn't reclaim your life. You burned the bridge of mine. And now I have no home, no daughter. You took my final years, my stability, my peace. That's when Evelyn closed the lid of the laptop. Not paused, closed. She didn't need to hear the rest. She knew how it would end. No confession, no understanding, just one last attempt to twist the blade while appearing wounded. The usual performance. But this time, Evelyn didn't step into the role. She stood slowly, walked to the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't falter. Margot's words landed like snow. On stone, visible, but powerless. For the first time, Evelyn chose silence, not as submission, but as strength. She placed the USB in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but out of disinterest. Let it sit there with old receipts and expired coupons, another discarded relic of a life she no longer served. That evening, Evelyn watered her plants, reheated lentil soup, and curled up in her chair to sketch. She didn't think of the video, didn't dwell on the voice trying to haunt her through screens. Instead, she listened to the wind tapping gently at the windows, the creak of floorboards under her own steps, her own presence unfiltered. Later, she opened her journal and wrote. She wanted to be the final chapter, but I've decided this isn't a memoir. It's a prologue. She paused, then added, there's no victory in making someone small. The real win is refusing to be shrunk. Outside, the sky turned indigo, and for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn felt truly alone and unafraid. There would be echoes, moments of doubt, grief in strange, sharp flashes, but there would also be mornings without dread, rooms without tension, time that belonged to her. And in that balance, she found something stronger than closure. She found peace. The art class met every Thursday at the community center. An old stone building with creaky floors and the scent of coffee, always hanging faintly in the air. Evelyn sat near the back, her sketchbook open, her pencil steady. The instructor, a woman named Callie, with silver curls and paint-streaked sleeves, always began the same way. We're not here to be perfect. We're here to begin. Evelyn clung to that. At first, her lines were hesitant, her shading stiff. But week by week, the pages filled. Hands, tree roots, a single daisy caught in wind. Each stroke reminded her she could make something. Something that wasn't survival. Something just hers. Outside class, Evelyn spent more time in the garden. She cleared weeds with bare hands, spread compost, arranged stones into borders. She planted lavender along the fence, sage near the porch, and rosemary under the kitchen window. The scent clung to her sleeves and hair. When she sat in the dirt, knees stained, and palms rough, she felt more grounded than she ever had. Neighbors noticed. 2 girls, maybe 7 or 8, stopped by one afternoon carrying a basket lined with a kitchen towel. These are from my mom, the taller one said. The younger added, she says your garden makes her feel brave. Evelyn knelt to their level. Tell her I said thank you. She smiled. The muffins were still warm. Cinnamon and apple. She didn't eat one right away, just held the basket in her lap, letting the quiet stretch around her, soft and full. Later that week, the phone rang. She Almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but instinct nudged her thumb to accept. Marin, a voice said, hoarse, hesitant, but unmistakable. Evelyn froze. It's me, Margot continued. I didn't want to call, but the doctors found something. I thought you should know. Evelyn said nothing. Silence widened between them. The kids ask about you, Margot added. They miss you. We all do. Evelyn almost laughed. We, as if there had ever been a united front. As if Margot hadn't dismantled every relationship Evelyn might have built, brick by controlling brick. I'm sorry, Margot whispered. For how I said things that night, it was the wine. And I was angry. You meant it, Evelyn replied, voice calm. There was a pause. This house doesn't feel right without you. Evelyn looked around at the daisy sketch. On the wall, at the way sunlight hit the bookshelf just right in the late afternoon, at the herbs swaying in the breeze outside the window. This house, she said slowly, finally, feels like mine. Another silence. So, Margot said, can we talk? Maybe you could stop by just to see each other. Evelyn exhaled. I can't go back to being small, she said gently. So you can feel big. Margot didn't respond. There was a soft, wounded sound. Half sigh, half scoff. Then the line went dead. Evelyn didn't cry, didn't shake. She simply stood and poured herself a glass of water. The quiet, once a punishment, had become her companion. That evening she lit a candle, opened her sketchbook, and drew roots, thick, tangled, breaking through stone. The next morning she stepped out to the garden with a towel in one hand and a packet of seeds in the other. The soil was dry but soft, the kind that welcomed change. It arrived on a Monday, tucked into Evelyn's mailbox with no stamp, no sender, just her name in faint blue ink, delicate, almost childish. Inside a card with watercolor roses and a handwritten message in blocky, uncertain penmanship. Hi, Evelyn. Grandma Margot wanted me to give this to you. She said you'd read it. If it came from me. She misses you. Please don't be mad at her anymore. A folded letter fell from inside the card, printed on Margot's stationery, scented faintly with something floral and sharp. Evelyn hesitated, but she read it. Evelyn, I know you think I've wronged you, that I was harsh, that I took too much. Maybe I did, but life isn't black and white. You had choices, too. You stayed because you wanted to, not because I made you. You let me take. Because you didn't stop me. That's on both of us. I'm old now, tired. I don't want to fight anymore, but I won't beg either. I won't rewrite the past for your comfort. We both played roles, and yours wasn't always the saint you make yourself out to be. If you want to talk, I'm here. But I won't apologize for being who I am. Evelyn folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the drawer beside the USB. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. Not even disappointment surfaced, just a quiet recognition. Some people don't change. They don't apologize because they don't believe they did anything wrong. And she no longer needed them to. That weekend, Evelyn hosted her first art workshop at the community center. She called it Sketching Self. Open to women over 50. No experience necessary. Just curiosity. 10 women showed up. One brought cookies. Another brought grief. One hadn't drawn since her husband died. Another said she hadn't picked up a pencil since 3rd grade. But they laughed, hesitated, scribbled, erased. And by the end they were all holding pages filled with crooked lines, half-finished flowers, and something more, permission. Evelyn watched them with quiet pride. No one asked about her past. No one measured her by her wounds. They saw her hands, her guidance, her stillness, and that was enough. Each Thursday the class grew. One week they painted mugs. Another they sketched each other's hands. Evelyn taught gently, not as a master, but as someone offering space, and in return they gave her community. A family born not of blood, but of choice. Her garden bloomed more each day. The sage thrived, the lavender stretched, and the rosemary tangled itself like wild joy. Evelyn spent afternoons there, with dirt under her nails and wind in her hair. She drank tea on the porch, read novels without checking the clock, and smiled more easily, especially when she wasn't thinking. Then one evening, just before sunset, there was a knock on the garden gate. Two small faces peered through the slats, familiar, bright-eyed. The girls with the muffin basket. "We brought more," the taller one said, holding up a container wrapped in checked cloth. "Mom made lemon scone," the younger added, "but we helped stir." Evelyn knelt down, accepting the basket. "Tell her I said thank you." The girls grinned, then paused. The older one tilted her head. "Mom says you're the bravest lady on this street." Evelyn blinked, the air catching slightly in her throat. "Well," she said softly, "tell her I think she's pretty brave, too." They ran off, laughter trailing behind like ribbon. Evelyn stood there for a while, the basket warm in her hands, the scent of lemons and thyme rising around her. She looked over the garden. Imperfect, alive, hers. She didn't need her mother's approval. She didn't need her past to be rewritten. She had roots now and wings. And she was finally fully wine to finally having a life free of dead weight. The words hung in the air for half a beat too long. Then her eyes met Evelyn's directly. "Honestly, Evelyn, the best gift you could give me is to leave my life." It was said lightly with a smirk, as if it was some clever joke, but no one laughed. June's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. Laura's fork clinked against her plate and stilled. Even the music seemed to quiet, retreating to the corners of the room. Evelyn blinked once, then twice. Her body didn't immediately register the sting. She forced a smile, a reflex, and stood slowly. Her napkin dropped to the floor. She began, but didn't finish. Her voice cracked, and rather than find words, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. Inside, the scent of lemon butter and caramelized peaches hit her like a memory. Her hands found the sink, and she turned on the cold water, letting it run over her fingers until they numbed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, rooted, as if the chill could erase the heat rising in her chest. From the dining room, she could hear the clatter of forks, the forced coughs of resumed conversation. No one came after her. No one checked. She dried her hands, took her coat from the hook near the back door, and slipped it on with practiced ease. The peach tart still sat on the counter, untouched. Evelyn glanced at it for a moment, then stepped outside into the late evening air, closing the door softly behind her. Evelyn had woken that morning with something soft blooming in her chest. Hope, brittle but persistent, clung to her ribs like dew on glass. It wasn't the grand kind, the movie ending, reconciliation, or a sudden maternal embrace. It was quieter, a wish for civility, a moment where Margot might acknowledge her without disdain, maybe even say thank you. She'd replayed the moment in her head. Margot taking a bite of tart, pausing, then smiling. "You remembered," she'd say, and Evelyn would smile back, not because it changed everything, but because it mattered finally. Instead, just as she was plating the salmon, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Margot called, already halfway down the hall. Evelyn mids. Scoop frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone else. Moments later, voices drifted in, unfamiliar. Laughter, high-pitched, breezy. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen to find a tall woman with sleek auburn hair standing near the entryway. Her arms wrapped around Margot like old friends. She wore a cobalt dress that fit too perfectly, a silver bracelet catching the light as she gestured animatedly. "This," Margot announced as Evelyn stepped closer, "is Caroline, my daughter." The room went quiet. Evelyn blinked. "Her what?" Caroline turned with a gracious smile. "Half-sister." "Technically," she said, extending a hand toward Evelyn. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Evelyn's eyes moved from the stranger's face to Margot's, searching. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Margot said, smoothing her scarf. "There never seemed to be a right moment, and I didn't want you to feel threatened." "Threatened?" "Oh, don't be dramatic." Margot waved a hand. Caroline and I reconnected last year. She's been living in Toronto. A successful architect. Travels constantly. I thought it was time she met the rest of the family. Family? Evelyn felt the floor shift. Slightly beneath her. The guests murmured among themselves, unsure whether to react or retreat. Margot led Caroline to the seat beside her at the head of the table, the one Evelyn usually occupied to help serve refill. Drinks, clear plates. Tonight she was 2 places down between June and an empty chair. As the dinner progressed, Margot fed over Caroline. Tell them about the museum you helped design in Montreal, she prompted between bites. And the grant you won from the Arts Council. Evelyn sipped her wine slowly. Her salmon cooled untouched. When the toast came, the one that ended with Evelyn being labeled dead weight, it wasn't just the words that hurt. It was their context. The subtle crescendo of dismissal. This wasn't a stray jab. It was orchestration. Margot had built the moment brick by brick. The surprise sister, the accolades, the reshuffling of familial roles. You've always been so quiet, Caroline said kindly at one point, as if Evelyn were a houseplant. Margot told me you're the caretaker type. That's such a generous spirit to have. Caretaker type. Evelyn felt the label sink into her like cement. No mention of her own education, the life she'd put on hold, the dreams shelved. Later, standing alone in the kitchen, she stared at her reflection in the oven door. Her face was pale, her eyes flat. The peach tart sat beside her, flawless and untouched. In another version of this night, it would have been the centerpiece. Instead, it felt like a relic from a story that no longer included her. She'd thought pain would come in screams and slam doors. But this was different. This was subtraction. Quiet and surgical. She wasn't just hurt. She was replaced. The morning after the birthday unraveling, Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, the house eerily still. Her hands rested in her lap, motionless, as if afraid to disturb the silence. The night had settled into her bones like cold fog, and everything felt heavier, older. She stared at the closet door, but didn't move to open it. Instead, her mind wandered back, uninvited, to a different silence, one from years ago when her phone rang as she was packing for her final semester in grad school. It had been snowing in small flurries outside her apartment window. Her thesis was half-written, her bags nearly zipped. Then came Margot's voice, brittle and breathy, telling her she'd slipped on the porch steps and fractured her hip. "You're all I have," she'd said softly, but with that sharp edge Evelyn always recognized. It wasn't pleading, it was positioning. She didn't even argue. Didn't ask how long the recovery would take or whether other help had been arranged. She just said, "I'll be there," and hung up. Her professor's face when she broke the news still haunted her, a mix of disappointment and something gentler, almost pity. "Just take a leave," he'd offered. "We'll keep your place open." But Evelyn never went back. She moved into the old house that weekend, telling herself it was temporary, just until Margot got back on her feet. Just until things stabilized. Weeks bled into months, months into years. At first, she kept applying for jobs in her field. Interviews came and went. Margot's needs always came first. "How could you think about work when I can't even climb the stairs?" Margot would snap, gesturing to her cane like a weapon. Eventually, Evelyn settled for a part-time role at the local library. Quiet, predictable, close to home, flexible enough to leave mid-shift when Margot had an episode or couldn't remember if she'd taken her pills. She stopped dating, not deliberately, just incrementally. It became too hard to explain her schedule, her obligations. Every time someone asked about her future, she offered vague smiles, changed the subject, or never called back. And Margot didn't make it easier. "I'm just saying," she'd remark over tea. "Some people aren't meant for big careers or complicated lives. Some are better at supporting others like you." At the time, Evelyn believed that meant she was needed, important, essential even. But the truth settled later, like Dust on a surface you forgot to clean. She wasn't being valued. She was being contained. Margot had slowly repainted the house. Gone were the yellow hallway walls. Evelyn adored, replaced by cool grays and stiff white trim. It's more modern, Margot claimed. She changed the kitchen tiles, discarded the vintage reading chair Evelyn bought with her first paycheck, and swapped out curtains Evelyn had sewn herself. Each change felt like erasure, but Evelyn told herself it was fine. The house still held her, even if it didn't look like hers anymore. She said yes to everything. Every little no was swallowed. That was their rhythm, Margot demanded. Evelyn adapted. Now seated on her bed years later, Evelyn looked around the room. Not a single thing in it reflected her. The walls were the color of compliance. The bedspread was Margot's. Even the slippers by the door weren't hers, just ones Margot thought looked tidy. She picked up a pen from the nightstand and opened her journal. The blank page stared back at her, patient and unassuming. I gave up so much trying not to make her feel alone, she wrote, but I never asked if I was allowed to want more than surviving her. She put down the pen and exhaled, the breath shaking in her throat. For the first time, she allowed herself to ask. What did she want? Not for Margot, for herself. The silence answered back, not empty, but waiting. That afternoon, Evelyn wandered into the attic, searching for something to occupy her mind. The air was thick with dust and old fabric, the scent of mothballs clinging to every corner. She hadn't been up there in years. Most of the boxes belonged to Margot. Holiday decorations, outdated photo albums, vinyl records too scratched to play. Her eyes landed on a weathered trunk tucked behind a stack of faded quilts. It had once belonged to her grandmother, and for a moment the sight stirred something gentle in her. She knelt, unclasped the brass latch, and opened it. Inside, among yellowed letters and brittle newspaper clippings, sat a small leather-bound journal. Margot's handwriting etched on the cover in gold ink. 1979. 1982. Curiosity prickled. That was the year Evelyn was born. She hesitated. Reading it felt intrusive, but a part of her, raw, aching, needed to understand, to make sense of the years she couldn't reclaim. She sat cross-legged on the attic floor and opened the journal. The early entries were filled with reflections on work, travel, late night musings on literature. Then came a shift. In an entry dated 2 months before Evelyn's birth, Margot wrote, I'm tired of pretending this is a gift. It isn't. This pregnancy wasn't planned. And nothing about it feels magical. Everyone keeps saying I'll change my mind once she arrives, but I won't. I never wanted this. Never wanted her. But now it's too late. Evelyn's breath caught. She reread the paragraph, hoping she'd misunderstood, but the words were precise, cold, undeniable. Another entry weeks later confirmed it. I'm practicing how to fake maternal joy. They say holding her will help. I doubt it. I feel nothing except resentment. I wanted a life that moved, not one stuck in diapers and noise. The attic seemed to darken, the air closing in. Evelyn clutched the journal tighter. Her heart beat loud in her ears. All the moments she tried to remember with softness. Her first school recital, the time she won a spelling bee and looked for Margot's smile in the crowd, rewrote themselves in sharp ink. None of it had been enough. She wasn't a daughter. She was a compromise, an accident managed with calculated tolerance. She closed the journal and sat still for a long time. Her mind spun back to her FDH birthday. Margot had given her a stuffed rabbit, one Evelyn had treasured for years. She remembered clutching it at night when the house was too quiet. She remembered how Margot said, I saw it and thought of you. Now she wondered if it had just been convenient, something snatched off a store shelf during errands. The descent from memory was steep. Beautiful recollections twisted into shadows. A smile here now looked like obligation. A lullaby sounded mechanical. Every photograph she'd once framed with affection seemed suddenly staged. Evelyn stood shakily and placed the journal back in the trunk, unable to bear the feel of it against her skin any longer. She climbed down from the attic and closed the door firmly, as though sealing the truth inside might delay its impact. In the kitchen, she boiled water, poured a cup of tea, and sat at the table. Without sipping. She didn't cry, not yet. The grief was too dense, too new. Sitting like a stone in her gut. She had spent decades trying to be enough for someone who never wanted her to begin with. That realization didn't free her. Not yet. It fractured her. And in that break, something quiet and necessary began to form. Not forgiveness, not even clarity, but distance. The kind that lets a person step back and finally see the whole picture. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, journal open. To a fresh page. The tea beside her had gone cold. Outside the wind teased branches against the window pane, but she barely noticed. The silence was thicker today, no longer just absence, but reckoning. She drew a line down the center of the page and titled the columns, What I Lost and What She Took. Under what I lost, she began, my degree, my 20 IS, the apartment with the yellow curtains, the scholarship too. Florence Daniel, the name made her pause. Daniel, the only man who had ever made her laugh so hard she forgot to be careful. They dated just before Margot's accident. Evelyn had been on the cusp of leaving for a research grant abroad. Daniel had offered to go with her. They'd made plans, danced in the kitchen barefoot, talked about Rome, summer, tomatoes, long walks with no destination. But when Margot called, Evelyn canceled the trip. Daniel had understood at first, but after the third time she broke dinner plans, the second anniversary forgotten, the fourth voicemail unanswered, he stopped trying. She never explained, never said, I'm stuck. Because she wasn't sure anyone would understand a trap built from duty. She moved to the next list. What she took, my time, my freedom, my savings, my voice, my name. She stared at the last one. It wasn't literal. Her name was still Evelyn on paper, but somewhere in the haze of the last 15 years, her identity had blurred into something conditional. She was Evelyn the helper, Evelyn the daughter, Evelyn the available, never just Evelyn. She flipped back a few pages in her journal and underlined a sentence she had written days earlier. I gave up so much, trying not to make her feel alone. Then she added below it, and in doing so, I became alone myself. The decision came like breath, quiet, inevitable. She opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, family law attorney near me. Dozens of results appeared, but one name caught her eye. Thomas Reyes. His website was simple, almost austere. No banners, no grinning stock photos, just a tagline. You don't need a war, you need a way out. She clicked, read testimonials, noted the address 2 towns over, far enough to feel separate, close enough to feel real. The next morning, Evelyn stood in front of her closet, choosing a blouse. Not because it was presentable, but because it made her feel steady, steel blue, long sleeves, no frills. She called the office. A calm voice answered, scheduled her for the following Thursday. The receptionist didn't ask questions, didn't ask who she was escaping. Later that day, Evelyn opened a drawer in the hallway desk, one Margot rarely touched, and began gathering documents, insurance papers, bank statements, utility bills with both their names. She created a new folder and labeled it separation. The word felt strange, as if she were filing for divorce. In a way, she was a separation from a life that had never truly been hers. She called the bank next, scheduled an appointment to open a solo account. She ordered a credit report and requested new passwords for her online access. Every task was small on its own, but together they formed something weightier. Momentum. That night, Evelyn sat on the porch, steps with her knees pulled to her chest. The stars were faint behind clouds, but the air was crisp, clean. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a version of life without the background noise of Margot's needs. She didn't see details yet, just outlines, a room she decorated for Herself, a Saturday morning with no obligations, a trip, maybe with no end date. It wasn't a plan, not yet, but it was a beginning. The bank lobby was sterile, all beige and chrome, humming faintly with fluorescent lights. Evelyn sat across from a young associate named Nina, who wore glasses too large for her face and spoke in a clipped, efficient tone. The moment felt surreal, as if Evelyn had stepped into someone else's life. She wasn't the kind of woman who questioned accounts or combed through fine print. She was the one who trusted, the one who let things slide for the sake of keeping peace. Not today. Nina tapped keys, brows furrowing as she scanned the screen. You said you were the primary account holder, she asked. Yes, Evelyn replied. It's a joint account, but everything was set up in my name originally. More typing, then silence. There have been multiple transfers over the past year, Nina said carefully. They're relatively small, mostly under $1,000, but consistent. Looks like a few each month. Evelyn nodded. She expected that much. Groceries, house repairs, medications. She'd assumed Margot was pulling from their shared account. Still, she wanted the exact numbers. But then Na's face changed. Wait, there's also a loan, she said slowly. A personal loan taken out last February. $25,000. Payments are being auto-deducted. Evelyn's stomach dropped. I didn't take out a loan, Nina glanced up. It's in your name. No, Evelyn said, her voice rising. That's not possible. She leaned forward, pulse racing. Show me the paperwork. Na clicked through screens, then turned the monitor. Evelyn stared at the application, her name, her address, her signature, or something that passed for it. The world tilted. She couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Would you like to dispute this? Nina asked, voice cautious now. Ellen couldn't answer. Her mind spun. Margot, of course, it was her. Who else had access? Who else knew her information, her handwriting, the security questions? Who else had filled Evelyn's childhood with careful manipulations disguised as affection? It wasn't just betrayal. It was sabotage. She'd been trying to climb out of a hole, only to realize someone had been shoveling dirt in from above. Yes, she finally said, dispute everything. After signing a series of forms and freezing the account, Evelyn walked to her car in a daze. The sky was overcast, wind pressing against her coat. She sat in the driver's seat and gripped the wheel, staring through the windshield without starting the engine. It was worse than she thought. Margot hadn't just controlled her life. She had actively dismantled it. Evelyn had spent years believing she was making sacrifices for family, for loyalty, for love. But this wasn't love. It was exploitation, deliberate, calculated. And now she was not just escaping a toxic bond. She was fighting for her financial survival. The image of her future shifted. No longer a clean break with time to heal. Now it was a battle, a legal one, a logistical one, a deeply personal one. She couldn't afford hesitation anymore. That night, Evelyn called Thomas Reyes and explained everything. His voice remained calm but firm. We'll file identity theft, he said. We'll subpoena bank records. You'll be protected. But we have to move fast. She agreed. Every document, every signature, every shred of evidence. She'd find it. She'd prove it. Because if she didn't, Margot wouldn't just haunt her, she'd ruin her. Later, Evelyn pulled out her journal and flipped to the page labeled what she took. She added one more line beneath the rest. My credit. She underlined it 3 times. Then she turned to a new page and wrote in all caps, I am not her bank. I am not her backup plan. I am not her prisoner. This wasn't about resentment anymore. It was about survival. And Evelyn wasn't backing down. The shift in Margot was subtle at first. After Evelyn stopped cooking for 2, after the silent mornings became standard, Margot began hovering again. Not confrontational, not manipulative, at least not overtly, just present. She knocked softly on Evelyn's bedroom door one morning with a tray in her hands, burnt toast, oversteeped tea. I figured You'd be tired, she said, voice threaded with artificial warmth. We haven't really talked since the party. Evelyn opened the door only a crack. You mean your birthday? Margot blinked, then forced a smile. Oh, come on. I was tipsy. People say things. Evelyn didn't reply. She let the silence hold. When it stretched too long, Margot added, I miss you. But Evelyn only nodded, took the tea with a thank you. That felt foreign in her mouth, and closed the door gently. The next few days followed a pattern. Margot left folded laundry on Evelyn's bed. She complimented Evelyn's cardigan. She laughed too loudly at nothing. Evelyn watched it all like a play she'd seen before. Same lines, different stage. She wasn't falling for it this time. The kindness wasn't real. It was a tether. An attempt to reel her back in. Restore the script, where Evelyn played the grateful daughter and Margot, the long-suffering matriarch, but Evelyn had stopped memorizing lines. At dinner, Evelyn made herself a single serving of pasta and ate it in silence. Margot lingered in the doorway, fork in hand. Smells nice, she said lightly. Did you make enough for both of us? Evelyn didn't look up. No. A beat of silence followed, then footsteps retreating into the living room. It wasn't dramatic, no slammed doors, just a steady, simmering tension that neither acknowledged aloud. One afternoon, Evelyn came home to find the living room rearranged. The bookshelf she'd curated was now filled with porcelain figurines. A heavy glass bowl of artificial lemons sat where her sketchbooks had been. Margot stood nearby, arms crossed. I thought we could use some cheer, she said as if daring Evelyn to object. Evelyn didn't. She turned, went upstairs, and closed her door. But she made a note in her journal. That night, the test has begun. Margot wasn't trying to repair. She was trying to reset, to reassert dominance masked as domesticity. That weekend, Evelyn removed the shared calendar from the fridge. She led the recurring grocery delivery. She stopped answering calls from relatives Margot had weaponized in the past. Cousins who guilt her with phrases like, she's your only mother, and you'll regret this when she's gone. Evelyn no longer had room for guilt in her chest. It had been full of that for decades. Instead, she filled her space with quiet routines, morning walks alone, library books stacked like allies on her nightstand. She began sketching again, rough pencil outlines that didn't need to impress anyone. Margot noticed. You've been distant, she said one evening as Evelyn passed through the hallway. I've been quiet, Evelyn replied. There's a difference. Margot narrowed her eyes. Is this how you punish me? Evelyn paused. Hand on the banister. If you feel punished by my absence, maybe it's because my presence was something you took for granted. She didn't wait for a reply. That night, Evelyn slept with her door open, not as an invitation, but as a symbol. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't retreating. She simply no longer feared the consequence of being herself. She had begun the process of detangling from the invisible strings that had bound her for too long, and while the knots were tight, she now knew they could be undone, one by one. The coughs started. Subtly, soft at first, almost theatrical in their rhythm. Margot began to sleep later, shuffling through the house in robes she hadn't worn in years, her voice thinned by a practiced rasp. Evelyn noticed, of course, but she said nothing until Margot sat down one morning with a man in a suit. This is Dr. Barrett, she introduced, dabbing at her lips with a tissue. He's helping me manage. Well, it's complicated. Dr. Barrett nodded, his demeanor stiff. Your mother's reported some alarming symptoms. Chronic fatigue, irregular blood pressure, signs of vascular instability. Evelyn blinked. But she hasn't seen her primary in months. Margot sighed dramatically. Well, I had to find someone new, someone who listens. Dr. Barrett handed Evelyn a manila folder. You should be informed as next of kin. The word struck oddly in her chest. Evelyn opened the folder. Inside, scans, lab results, medication lists. It looked official. It felt rehearsed. Still something in her tightened. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of that old reflex. Protect, support, fix. For the next few days, Evelyn's routine shifted. She asked if Margot needed water, offered to refill her tea, even made soup one night despite herself. A vestige of that daughter role tugging at her spine. Margot soaked it in like sunlight. Her tone softened. She let Evelyn brush her hair, whispered thanks with fragile eyes. It almost worked. Almost. Then came the phone call. Evelyn returned home early from the bank to grab a missing document. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Margot's voice, low conspiratorial, coming from the living room. No, she's folding, Margot said. A few more days of weakness, maybe. A fainting spell, and she'll be back in line. She always does. Silence then. The floorboards. It was hers now. She stood in the center of the living room and exhaled. For the first time in decades, the house didn't feel like a museum to someone else's preferences. It didn't feel like a battlefield of unspoken rules. It felt like home. Later, she brought down the painting of wild flowers she'd tucked away in the attic 5 years ago, hung it above the fireplace. Then she changed the hallway bulbs to warm light, pulled her grandmother's quilt from the cedar chest, and draped it over the back of the couch. Nothing dramatic, just choices. Hers. And when she sat down, cup of tea in hand, feet curled under her on the couch, she let herself smile, not out of joy, but recognition. She had stayed, and Margot had left. But Evelyn, she had arrived. Evelyn found it the next day, tucked beside the kettle on the kitchen counter. An unmarked USB drive, no note, just a present so deliberate it couldn't be ignored. For a few moments she stared at it, heart steady but unsettled. She knew who had left it. Knew it wasn't an apology, but curiosity, stubborn and human, pressed her toward the laptop. She plugged it in. A single file loaded. Final thoughts. MP4. She clicked. The video opened to Margot, sitting in the armchair that used to belong to Evelyn's father. The lighting was dim, her scarf perfectly draped. She looked composed, as always, intentional. If you're watching this, she began, her tone clipped. I've left, not by choice, but by coercion. You've made it clear. You don't want me here. Evelyn leaned back, arms crossed. Margot continued, I did what mothers do. I gave. I managed. I kept the house running. I held you up even when you had no spine. And now, this eviction is how I'm repaid. Her voice didn't break. It sharpened. You've tacked labels onto me. Narcissist, manipulator, abuser. Fine. Wear your victim badge proudly. But just remember, Evelyn, you didn't save yourself. You exiled me. Evelyn's jaw tensed. Margot smiled slightly. No.